Hello, everybody. Aimer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. I'm in my new temporary office, so things are moving around a little bit. Pardon the slight mess. This time we are talking about Season 5, Episode 4, which is called Homecoming. This is one that I think a lot of fans of the series, everybody knows what this one is about, but let's go through it real quick. This is another one of those personal missions. It starts out with Jim in his old hometown of Norville, happily reminiscing about old times with his dad when they ran a company near the lake for boat rental and things like that. A lady named Connie Hastings drives by and waves, but she has a tire blowout a short ways down the road. And her spare is flat too, so she heads back towards Jim's place for help. Suddenly she hears a creepy voice calling out to her and sees a bespectacled figure in the nearby bushes, screaming out to Jim for help. Connie is grabbed just as Jim reaches her and the attacker runs away. Some of the townspeople confront Sheriff Brad Owens about the fact that Connie would have been the third woman killed by this assailant had Jim not been there, and they demand action. Brad's brother-in-law Joe Key thinks he should resign, but Brad refuses. Jim suggests that some people should sign on as deputies to help him, instead of just complaining, which doesn't get a lot of support from the throng. Connie tells Owens that she only remembers the thick glasses the man wore, and it's been found that the blowout was deliberately set up, so the sheriff wants her to leave town for a while, which doesn't sit well with Connie. Jim comes over to Brad's house for lunch and chats with his wife Cynthia, looking at old pictures and remembering old times. Dana's having a small house party with the rest of the IMF there. Barney tells them what he heard from Jim and tells them that he's going in to help as a criminologist. And the others offer to help if needed too. Jim then heads to Midge's Tavern where a lot of young folks are hanging out. Not young folks, just a lot of folks are hanging out. And reunites with Midge, played by Loretta Swit, who you will likely remember as Houlihan from MASH. Jim notices a young man, Seth Morley, with a 1,000-yard stare. Midge tells him that he's returned from Vietnam and has severe PTSD, before PTSD was even a thing, and thick glasses. Jim chats him up and lends a sympathetic ear. Joe tries to get him away from Seth, not caring for Seth's attitude, driving Seth into a bit of a rage, forcing Jim to restrain him until he calms down and slinks out. Connie tells Deputy Carl to go get something to eat, and while he's out, calls Joe and asks him to meet before she leaves town, saying she loves him. As Connie prepares to head out, she hears the creepy voice again and makes a run for it, but is cornered by the attacker and strangled to death. Jim comes to Seth's place, which is quite a mess, and finds a list of names, including the 2 dead women and Connie Hastings. Hearing someone coming and seeing a gun, Jim hides and is able to disarm him, but it turns out to be Sheriff Owens, not Seth, who tells Jim the news about Connie, and an earpiece mapping Seth's glasses was found at the scene. Jim shows him the list, and Brad tells his office to arrest Seth. Barney arrives and says that from what he finds on Connie, the attacker had small but strong hands. Jim remembers pushing Connie on a swing when they were young, as the rest of the IMF prepares to come in undercover, setting up Dana to become the next victim somehow. Jim talks to Cynthia and Joe's wife Julia, whose names were also on Seth's list. Finding it odd that they're married and the other 3 weren't, can't come up with anything that they have in common, while Seth ominously pops his head up from the bushes near Jim's house. At Midge's, Joe tells everyone that it seems so obvious that it was Seth with his clear anger issues. Dana comes into the bar and immediately turns heads, taking the waitress job that's available, and Joe immediately inserts himself into the conversation, saying he'll be glad to set Dana, who calls herself Lori, in an affordable place. Cynthia comes to Jim's place and finds Seth there. He says he won't hurt her, just wants to talk as Jim arrives, seeing her car. Seth tells Jim to come in too, holding a gun. Seth laments that he's not a murderer. He didn't kill any civilians in Vietnam, even when they fired at him. Jim says he wants to help, and he'll get the sheriff to allow Seth to speak to the town about his story and tell them the truth. That way Cynthia is safe. Cynthia tips Brad off, and they're ready for Seth at the sheriff's office, disarming him and putting him in a cell. Seth is enraged that Jim deceived him, yelling to be let out, and then crying sadly. Joe takes Dana to her new digs, telling her he'd like to see her socially as long as she doesn't mind that he's married. After Joe leaves, Willie drives by to make sure Dana's okay. The sheriff is about to declare the case closed, but Barney says it isn't. The killer has smaller feet and clearly smaller hands than Seth. The earpiece matches Seth's glasses, but Jim says it was missing the other night at Midge's. Cynthia remembers that the women on Seth's list met at church some time ago and discussed reaching out to the troubled Seth in Vietnam and write to him. That night at Midge's, Julia is bothered by her husband's blatant flirting with Dana and tells Jim about the call she got from Connie before she called Joe at Midge's and reveals that they were involved. Joe is the connection between all of the women. There's a bit of an angry mob outside the building where Seth is about to be released to a state hospital. The townspeople are furious that he seems to be getting away with murder, and Joe tells Jim that someone is likely to take a shot at Seth before he's away. And Jim laments what become of the whole situation and people turning on the young kids that they sent off to war. Willie arrives as Connie's cousin to take her away for the funeral, opening Seth's cell and knocking him out with chloroform. Jim and Barney offer to be sworn in as deputies so that Willie can load Seth into the waiting casket to get him away from the building. The cops then discover Seth's empty cell. That night at the bar, Joe laughs it up at how pathetic Sheriff Owens is, allowing Seth to escape, and Owens questions himself for getting fooled too. Paris arrives as Dana's boyfriend, accusing Joe of muscling in on his action, and they have to be pulled apart after a scuffle. Barney tells the sheriff to use this opportunity, as Dana is now a likely target, and they can keep an eye on her. It's late at Midge's, and Joe Keith calls it a night, Midge following him, leaving behind only Dana and reporter Stan Sherman, who wears really thick glasses. Stan asks for some booze, and Dana goes down to the basement to get it. She hears a door slam, suddenly the lights go out, and the creepy voice is heard again. Looking at his watch, Jim recalls another old memory of the kids having timed races, and one who always ran faster than the others, a tomboyish blonde girl. Realizing the truth, he rushes in and pulls Dana's attacker off of her. It's Midge. She confesses that she's guilty and did it because she loved Joe too and wanted to protect him from all the young hussies he seemed to prefer, but were no good for him, having a crying fit as Jim looks on sadly. Jim has one more reminisce at the old place before the IMF heads away, back to the real world, I guess. I would ordinarily say mission accomplished, but there really wasn't a mission here, so let's just leave it at that. I'm going to give this episode a grade of a C-. And as usual, I'll just begin with the good. It fits in with what we have seen with the season so far and where the writers and directors kind of want to go, right? In terms of talking about current issues, things that are affecting the country at large, like, the fallout from, mostly men, but obviously some women returning from Vietnam and things like that. The title Homecoming, obviously it's a homecoming for Jim Phelps, but it can also refer, I don't know whether this is deliberate or not, but it can also refer to the homecoming of young people like Seth. They're coming home and, they're finding, like Jim comes home to his, quaint little small town, medium-sized town, and finds it's not what it used to be. And here are young men and women like Seth also coming back to their hometowns and finding out the world is very, very, very different now. And so it appears to me that the writers and producers are basically embracing that vibe and saying, yeah, you know what, the world is different and we're acknowledging that. So, as I've said before, I think they deserve some kudos for that. The plots and the show and the writing may not be as great as it was back in seasons 2 and 3. That's fine, and again, that's a debate for another time. But had they kind of tried to stay, on the straight and narrow with that and try and do the same types of plots and keep going without acknowledging the fact that the world was becoming different, we would complain about that too. So I do continue to applaud the writers for kind of, shifting a little bit as things go. Let me turn this a little bit. I think that's a little bit better. Definitely for me, things that are good. everything revolving around that angle of the story. The MVP for me of this episode is absolutely Seth Morley, who is played by an actor named Frank Webb. I looked him up and wondered, how come I haven't really seen much of this guy? And then, sadly, I realized why. Frank Webb died in a car accident in 1974 at the age of 26. What a shame. But the performance that he puts on in this episode is nothing short of fantastic, in my opinion. Again, there are people still around. We're talking about something that happened 50 years ago. There are people who lived through it. I'm certainly not going to pretend that I can have any insight into how, that sort of thing, like how that affects people. But, I do appreciate that today things like that are being taken somewhat more seriously. Like at the time, the idea of somebody having PTSD, that wasn't even a thing. It wasn't even a term, right? But people were coming back with that. People were coming back with ridiculous stress. And it seems to me that I wasn't around at the time, but clearly others had this attitude like, oh, suck it up, it's not that bad. Boy, that's definitely not the way to handle people who have that level of stress and trauma. Frankly, it is trauma. So I do appreciate the way that is portrayed in this episode. It's something that the authors and the producers could have turned into something very, very anvilicious, as sometimes they are wont to do. But they don't do that here. It's addressed head on, it's portrayed pretty accurately, and it's treated seriously, as it should be. But it doesn't upstage the plot, and it doesn't become the focus of the episode. And I really, really like that. Okay, let's do exactly that. I really applaud it. Address it, treat it seriously, move on. That's good. I should also say a little bit about the other guest stars. I already talked about Frank Webb. Joe Moross, who plays the sheriff in this one, he's fine. Fred Bear, who plays Joe Keith, and also Sharon Acker, I guess, who plays Connie Hastings. Bear some mention here. The guest cast is fine. There's a lot of them. So again, there's not, the screen time is divided up amongst them all. So the cast is fine. They're okay. A lot of them are just not very notable, just because of the way that the plot is designed. Also good. This is a really, really good role for Dana. Remember, the authors also have to make Leslie Warren part of this plot and try and make it believable. Frankly, while Leslie Warren is a fine actress, she's not Barbara Bain. She's younger, and she, she can't always do the sorts of roles, nor should she necessarily, that Barbara could have done, or Lee Merriweather, or any of some of the other ladies that we've seen so far. And so, again, finding those sorts of plots, really, really important. And I think this is a fine role for Leslie Warren here. Moving on, I think we've got to go to more of a point-counterpoint sort of thing. The ending of this episode is, there's some good about it, there's some not so good about it. The good about it is that I think it's really, really well staged, and that is partially because, maybe not partially, maybe mostly because the writers have really maintained the suspense in this episode. The first time you watch this, if you don't know who the killer is in the end, there's absolutely no indication, and there's certainly every contraindication that it is who it turns out to be. And that's really, really good. I do applaud the writers for coming up with a story that really does maintain that right up to the last moment. That said, the counterpoint of that is, even though the suspense is there and the scene is very, very well staged right up until that last moment, I don't know that the writers set the stage for us really being so, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not that we're not interested in finding out who it is. It's just that it does, to me, and again, maybe there's really no way to avoid this. Obviously, it has to be somebody. But I just can't see that, like, I don't know how else to say it. I'll just come out and say it. Do we really care so much? Like, okay, all right, so it was Midge. Had it been somebody else, would we have cared so much? Oh, okay, so it was that guy. It's really hard for me to say or express without coming off as being really, really flippant. And I really don't mean to be, but seriously. Okay, that's what happened, and now I guess we're moving on. Okay, next. And it really boils into, now that I've made that kind of counterpoint, going into the what is not good. Really, the problem with this episode is that it lacks the Mission Impossible feel. Okay, there's no two ways about it. Yes, it has those characters. Yes, there is, some of the, the techniques and ways and means of going about things that we see on other episodes of the show. But in terms of just having the proper feel of what this show is about, it's really not there, unfortunately. And that's the problem. Like, okay, it's an episode, I get it, but it's right on the edge of, I've mentioned how a lot of episodes, even in this particular season that we've already seen, are very unique. Okay, there's unique, and then there's kind of that line that kind of crosses over unique and being like, completely out there. Like, okay, unique to the point where it doesn't even make sense. I don't think it crosses that line, but boy, it's really, really, really close. There's a lot of plot devices and plot overall that has to just kind of be shoehorned into this show because, like I said, it's not really what this show is about. And that's really the key thing of why, even though it is, well staged and all the good things that I've mentioned, that's why I think it needs to end up with a C-, mostly because of that. Sadly, again, it lacks teamwork. All of the team is involved, but Willie doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. Paris really doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. Kind of out of necessity, that's kind of the way that the plot unfolds. So, again, all of that stuff just kind of takes it away from the subset of episodes that we can characterize as, yeah, those are really good Mission Impossible episodes. This is just a TV drama, whodunit, that has kind of been shoehorned somewhat into this particular show with this particular cast. Not bad, not done well, but again, it just kind of doesn't belong. And I think that's about it. Thank you as always for watching. Please like this review, please subscribe to my channel, and please leave your comments. Love to hear what you think about this episode. This is one of the better known episodes, I think. Everybody remembers this one. Oh yeah, that one where Jim went to his hometown, right? It's easy to identify. So I look forward to your comments about that one, about this one. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.